North Dakota is a state of about 740,000 people. Our Attorney General estimates that 248,000 North Dakota families have been affected by this. And let me tell you, I've heard from a lot of them. And I want to just tell you that I am deeply concerned about the remedial efforts and how all of that rolled out to begin with. First off, if you have this level of information on consumers that they didn't give you, that's all part of this thing that Elizabeth was talking about, and you don't have a system in place for a fire drill on what you do if you're breached, after you told us that you get notifications all the time of potential breaches. And then you say, oh, we had to create all of this system. We had to create this thing out of whole cloth, right? That's what you've told us. Why the rollout after the breach was notified, why it went so poorly, and why people were not protected, and why in many cases it was like, okay, but you're going to charge you a fee if you do this. We're going to do this. My consumers are like, why do I have to now spend money to protect myself when it's their fault? And so I think it's not enough for you to say, my goodness, look at the magnitude of this, when you should have anticipated it. The same way you should anticipate whether you have a fire in a building. You should be ready when it happens. And it goes to what Senator Tillis just said. We all know it's going to happen again. And I'm saying this because I want all CEOs who have access to this kind of information to know I'm going to ask a question on what they're doing to prepare for a breach. Now, I want to get back to the FBI. You said, look, we get a lot of these breaches. This happens all the time. We didn't realize it was as serious as what it was. What is the date you notified the FBI, and who made that notification?
Senator, the date was August 2nd. The head of security at that time would have notified the FBI, the cyber security forensic team, and King & Spalding.
And when would the head of security have notified your chief legal counsel or chief legal officer?
On and around that same time.
Yeah, and when did he approve the stock trades?
Senator, he approved the stock trades on the 1st and the 2nd for the 3 individuals. At that time, as I alluded to earlier, it was a suspicious activity. There was no indication of a breach.
How many times do you notify the FBI? You do that every day, every week?
I don't have that specific data, but it is not unusual. I mentioned earlier that we have millions.
I get that. I want to know how many times when you're notified, you actually turn around and notify the FBI.
We can get that information. I don't have that.
Yeah, well, that's a problem because it looks pretty suspicious, and your chief legal officer has some explaining to do. Because even after he knew that there was a notification to the FBI about this level of breach, he did not claw back or try to undo those transactions and reverse what clearly appears to be a pretty beneficial situation for 3 of your employees. I want to talk about remedial measures and go back to consumers. Obviously, we're in this very big discussion about what we're going to do with mandatory forced arbitration. It's interesting because if I go out there and sign a contract with somebody, maybe I can protect myself, maybe I can't. I don't think that fine print in a contract is exactly anything other than illusory, but we can argue that point. But why should you ever make that choice and mandate forced arbitration in your business?
Senator, a point of clarification, and this is part of my apology earlier. The intent was never to have arbitration clause in the product that the services were offered to the consumer at that time. It was a part of a boilerplate. It was a part of a product that we were offering to consumers prior to the breach. Yeah. It was a mistake we made.
But let's just ignore for a minute the breach. Why should the consumer not be able to make that choice, especially in this situation when the consumer is not your customer?
Again, to be clear, that was not the intent for the breach. Arbitration clause is a legally viable path for us to take at this time. That's why it was in the consumer offering.
Yeah, well, I think we've got some real challenges in taking a look at how we provide a real remedy to consumers in this situation. And this won't be the first time that we have a hearing like this. We had one yesterday. We're having one today. But I guess my warning, Mr. Chairman, would be, I'm going to ask every person out there who has responsibility as a CEO for consumer data to do the right thing. And that is, right now, start thinking about, if this happens to me, how do I treat my consumers and the people who have lost their personal data? And maybe we ought to start thinking about opting in as opposed to opting out. And so, you know, I want my credit locked until I unlock it. Why can't I have that option? Why do I have to pay to have my credit locked?
Senator, you don't. It is free. It's part of the offering we just made. For lifetime.